Hello, I'm Lee Sales. Welcome to this ABC News special, Hillary Rodham Clinton, an Australian Conversation. Let me explain today's format. The Secretary of State will address our audience here in Melbourne for about 10 minutes or so, and I'll briefly interview her afterwards. I'll then open the floor to questions from our audience, which will go for about 3/4 of an hour. In our discussion, we'll also include a handful of the hundreds of questions we've received from all around the country via Twitter and Facebook, and also on video. To introduce the Secretary of State, here's the University of Melbourne's Vice-Chancellor, Professor Glyn Davis.
Lee, thank you. Lee, thank you. Foreign Minister, Ambassador, Chancellor, colleagues, friends. Good morning and welcome to the University of Melbourne. It's an enormous pleasure to welcome you on what's going to be a very special event. It's a special honour to welcome an outstanding global policymaker and leader, the United States Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton, to our campus this morning. This is an extraordinary opportunity to hear from and to engage with Secretary Clinton. In our customary fashion, I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and pay respects to their elders past and present. I want to acknowledge the Asia Society, which has played a crucial role in bringing about today's gathering. And I want to acknowledge AsiaLink, chaired by Sydney Meyer, led by Jenny McGregor, here at the University of Melbourne, and Lee Sales as well, and the ABC for all of the work that's made today possible. This morning we'll hear from Secretary Clinton, who's travelling through the Asia-Pacific to promote the strong engagement between the United States and many of Australia's regional neighbours. On her current trip, Secretary Clinton has experienced distinctive regional culture, including Cambodia's remarkable Angkor Wat, Papua New Guinea's native culture, and some of New Zealand's wonderful ceremonial greetings. And now this, her first visit to Melbourne. We look forward to the Secretary's reflections on the United States, Asia and Pacific relations, as well as her perspectives on the future of the Australian-American alliance, which has been central to our interests since the signing of the ANZ alliance almost 60 years ago. So it is a great pleasure to ask you to join me in making welcome our most distinguished guests. Please welcome the United States Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you. It is wonderful to be here today, and I want to thank Alex Chernoff, the Chancellor, and Glyn Davis, the Vice Chancellor, for their warm welcome. I want to thank Sydney Meyer, the AsiaLink Chairman. I see my colleague and friend, your Foreign Minister, Kevin Rudd, here, and I thank him for working so closely with us. And I am delighted that in a few minutes I will be able to sit and talk with Lee Sales. And so for me, this is a special occasion to be with you in Melbourne at this great university. I've had the extraordinary pleasure of visiting Australia before, spending time in Sydney, snorkeling at the Great Barrier Reef, going to Canberra, meeting crocodiles and kangaroo, and I am very pleased that finally I'm here in Melbourne, which I first glimpsed on my family's very small black and white television screen during the Olympics in 1956. And before you do all the calculation, that was a really long time ago. You know, like many Americans when I was growing up, what I knew about Australia was great open spaces, lots of exotic flora and fauna, really hardy people, kind of like the Wild West, but with better beer, and a lot more of a sense of pioneering spirit at that time. And of course, I'm sure that for many of you, from afar, the United States looks as though every American is living his or her own reality TV show. And part of what I'm doing as Secretary of State is not only meeting with the leaders of governments like yours here in Australia, but also meeting with citizens, particularly young people, because I want America's outreach around the world to go far beyond the government halls and all of the official back and forth, and to have a chance to hear what is on your minds, as well as for you to ask me questions. Our two countries have a lot in common. We are both pluralistic democracies, founded by immigrants and pioneers and dreamers who didn't take no for an answer and refused to accept limits on what they thought was possible. We have been, and I hope always will be, nations that are ready to face the future without fear, rolling up our sleeves and getting on to whatever the next challenge might be. Now, of course, we have differences, and we may go into some of that during the question and answer period. I've never understood why you would ruin a perfectly good slice of bread with Vegemite. But I'm sure you have some of the same reactions when you travel to our country and see what we eat. I had hoped to be here last January, but I was on my way when the earthquake in Haiti struck and felt compelled to turn around and go back and help supervise and organize our relief efforts there. And of course, I knew Australians would understand, because Australians have responded with such generosity to disasters among your neighbors. You know, after the tsunami in 2004, Australia sprang into action, sending rescue teams, doctors, supplies all over the region. And more recently, Australian medical teams have helped the people of Pakistan cope with the devastation of the terrible flooding there. I think that is one of the most important qualities we have in common, an impulse of generosity that is embedded deep in our national character, regardless of political affiliation. Both Australia and the United States work to advance not only our own interests as we see them, but also to protect friends and allies, to work toward the causes of peace, prosperity, and justice for people everywhere. It's just who we are, it's in our DNA, and it helps to explain the enduring bond between us. And today, in a time of such complex challenges, from climate change to nuclear proliferation, the world needs nations like ours that accept the responsibility of working together to solve shared problems. Leadership from countries like Australia and America, and the strength of the alliance that binds us, is more important than ever, not only regionally, but globally as well. Australia has always understood and accepted this responsibility. It has increased military cooperation with Malaysia and Singapore, provided crucial assistance in Timor-Leste's transition to independence, and led stabilization forces in the Solomon Islands. And your efforts to promote sustainable development around the world reflect an understanding of how important it is to lend a hand to those in need. And your sending peacekeepers to dangerous missions in troubled lands sets a very good model. For our part, since the first days of the Obama administration, the United States has reaffirmed our commitment to be an active partner and leader in the Asia-Pacific. We're practicing what we call forward deployed diplomacy, sending our diplomats and our development experts across the region. This is my 6th visit to the Asia-Pacific as Secretary of State. The President is making his 2nd, as we are here in Australia. He's in India, then he goes on to Indonesia, then to the G20 meeting in Seoul, Korea, and then the APEC meeting in Yokohama, Japan. We are working very hard to build even stronger our historic alliances with Japan, South Korea, Thailand, the Philippines, and of course, Australia. And we know that the relationship and the treaty alliance between us has really been forged in war, but it is founded on our shared love of peace. Yes, our soldiers have fought side by side from the trenches of World War I to the mountains of Afghanistan in defense of democracy and our common values. And Americans will never forget that after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, Australia invoked our treaty alliance. That meant a great deal to us. And we grieved with you after terrorists murdered 88 Australians in Bali. And we have renewed our determination not only to defeat violent extremism, but to offer alternatives and a different vision of the future to people who might otherwise be unwilling to pick sides. So the United States has no better friend than Australia, and it is a partnership that we have to keep evolving. We can't just look to the past and say, haven't we been great together? We have to say, what do we now need to do going forward? Let me just mention a few issues. First, on security. Our future security depends on our abilities to adapt to emerging threats and unexpected challenges. So today, that means cooperating to keep the seas safe from piracy, protecting our computer networks and infrastructure from cyber attacks, and finding more effective ways to prevent and respond to natural disasters. That's especially important here, where earthquakes, typhoons, and tsunamis continue to batter our friends and neighbors, as I experienced with one of the aftershocks in Christchurch at 2:43 in the morning the other day. We know that this will be a continuing set of very difficult problems, and we need to be smarter about how we address them. Unfortunately, if climate change continues unchecked, natural disasters may only become more frequent and more deadly. And I want to thank the people of Australia for being leaders in trying to figure out how best to deal with climate change. I think it's understandable because in this region of the world, including here in Australia, you're subject to some of the worst effects, from rising ocean levels and extreme weather to drought and mass migration. Later this month, the nations of the world will meet in Cancun to continue the work we started in Copenhagen. And it's especially important to recognize that the very existence of a lot of our small Pacific Island neighbors is at stake. So we want to step up our work together on climate change, and later today I will go with the Prime Minister to look at some of the renewable energy programs that you are doing here. We need to do more to work with our Pacific Island friends, and last week I was pleased to announce that our development agency, USAID, will open a new office in Fiji to serve as a base for work throughout the region. And we will work on health, we will work on women's empowerment, we will work on good governance, but we will pay special attention to a new fund we're creating of $21 million for these small island nations to adapt to climate change. And we're going to be working together with Australia to persuade the military government in Suva to meet its commitment to bring democracy back to Fiji. In the short term, we would like to see steps that advance political freedom, such as allowing professional civilians to return to key government ministries. But we're going to look for new opportunities, and the foreign minister addressed some of those in our press conference yesterday. We want to forge a close working relationship on development needs between the United States and Australia, particularly on education, health, women's empowerment, and sustainable economic development, as well as championing democracy and human rights. Increasing trade and spurring economic growth is one of our additional major goals. We think it's a win-win for Australia and the U.S. Our free trade agreement has boosted jobs in both countries, and I will see more of that when I do an event about trade between Australia and the United States later this afternoon. To continue this progress, we are both pressing ahead on something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's an ambitious, multilateral free trade agreement that would bring together many more nations of the Pacific Rim. Australia and the United States are helping to lead those negotiations. And we're also working through APEC, which the United States will host in Hawaii in 2011. We see that as a pivotal year to drive progress on internal economic changes that will open more markets and make sure that any growth is more sustainable and inclusive. And finally, we believe that the United States and Australia have been at the forefront of figuring out how to organize the entire region for the future. It's not enough just for us to have a strong bilateral relationship. How do we interact with everyone else. And Kevin Rudd has been one of our best consultants on how best to do this. The foreign minister's arguments helped convince both President Obama and me to join the East Asia Summit because we think being part of the regional architecture in the region is absolutely essential. Together, we're engaging emerging powers like China, India, and Indonesia, and with burgeoning partners like Vietnam, Singapore, and Malaysia. Clearly, China's rapid growth in recent years is among the most consequential developments in the Asia-Pacific, indeed in the world. And both the United States and Australia reject the zero-sum view that some have, that one country's rise means another country's decline. We're actually working to build a positive, cooperative, and comprehensive relationship for China. This relationship between Australia and China, between the U.S. and China, and among the three of us, is one of the most consequential that we have. So we're committed to getting this right. And as you can see, we have a full plate of issues that we're addressing every single day. But what's most important to me is that the bonds between our people runs so deep. We are a very future-oriented set of peoples. And I travel the world as Secretary of State, and I go into many countries that are riven by conflict, having great difficulty addressing the needs of their own people, in part because they cannot leave the past behind. They cannot say we have to move forward together. We need a different approach to how we're going to build an inclusive society, create better economic opportunity, and so much else. We look at Burma today holding flawed elections that once again expose the abuses of the military junta. And it's heartbreaking because the people of Burma deserve so much better. And Australia and the United States will continue to work together to establish an international commission of inquiry to hold those leaders in Burma accountable for human rights violations, continuing persecution of ethnic minorities. And we hope that perhaps out of these elections, some leaders will emerge who know that Burma has to take a different track, that they cannot continue to do the same thing and realize the potential of their people. Because at its heart, our alliance is one of values. And as we look to the future, we have no greater responsibility than staying true to those values and expanding fundamental freedoms to places where they are denied. So we must redouble our efforts to advance democratic reforms and human rights, especially women's rights, throughout the Asia-Pacific and the world. And over the years, we have fought side by side, not just because our shores were threatened or our interests were at risk, but to defend these core values that make us who we are. We are both countries that attract many immigrants, and as I look at this audience, I assume there are some here, or the children of immigrants who came to Australia for a better life, who came, yes, for the economic opportunity that a free market economy provides, but also came for the freedoms to be oneself, to express one's opinions, to worship as one pleases. That is at the core of what we believe. You know, I've been to the War Memorial in Canberra. I've walked the Hall of Memory, and I've paid my respects at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. We have similarly hallowed places in America. Now, inevitably, time will weather the monuments and thin the ranks of the veterans who march in the parades. I'm particularly hopeful that young people who I fervently wish never have to go to war will understand that you are here at this place, at this time, because of all the sacrifices of those who went before. It is our job, and not just those of us who serve in public service, but it is our job as citizens of free countries to make sure that those values are understood, respected, and passed on from generation to generation. Our alliance demonstrates a commitment to doing that. Yes, we're looking back to make sure we never forget, but we're also looking forward to make sure we envision and then produce a future worthy of your dreams. Thank you all very much.
Madam Secretary, welcome. I think you can see how thrilled our audience is to have you.
I'm very thrilled to be here. Thank you. And besides, they get a break from studying for exams. So.
Well, exactly. You've done these forums all around the world. What is it that you like about them, and what do you feel that you've learned from doing them?
What I like about them is it gives me a chance to stand up or sit up on stages like this and look out at audiences that are primarily of young people, and to then have a chance to answer as many questions as we have time for. And the questions are always informative. The perspective that people have. I've been asked nearly everything from one end of the globe to the other. And I learn a lot about what's going on. I'll give you an example. I was in Cambodia just a few days ago in Phnom Penh at an event like this with about 500-600 young people, mostly students. And what was on their minds was very much in line with what we see as great potential for Cambodia. Economic opportunity, more emphasis placed on democratic reforms and political freedoms. And so when you hear it from people in unscripted settings like this, it does give you a sense of what's really going on, what people are talking about. And it also gives me the opportunity in my discussions with leaders to make the talk about human rights or political reform or anything else more contextual. So I get a lot from these settings and hope that the audience does as well.
You mentioned in your speech that the Australia-US alliance is a partnership we have to keep evolving. Our Foreign Minister, Kevin Rudd, said in your press conference yesterday that Australia welcomes the US making greater use of our defence facilities. Does the US consider that it needs an enhanced military presence in Australia?
Well, I think what the Foreign Minister and I were discussing yesterday is the decades-long tradition of the United States sharing facilities, being invited by the Australian government and military going back many years to train, to work together on projects. And take just one example of forward deployment to respond to disasters. We know they're going to get worse. I mean, even if we all did everything we believe we should tomorrow on climate change, we believe that the long-term weather forecasts are such that we're going to have a lot more displacement. So we need to be smarter about how we work together. And so we'll be discussing at this OSMAN, which is foreign ministers and defense ministers, tonight and tomorrow, how better to do that. Or take joint cooperation in space, something that we think should be reserved for peaceful uses. And how can Australia and the United States advance our partnership on that? So there are many ways that we will build on what has been a cooperative joint relationship going back in the past to make us stronger, better prepared in the future.
On climate change that you mentioned, you've been travelling during the US midterm elections, but President Obama has said in the wake of that result that cap and trade on carbon emissions is dead as a policy for the United States. Where to next then on climate change?
Well, Lee, I think that there are a number of different approaches. The president tried very hard and passed through one house of the Congress a very effective framework for cap and trade. But the political winds have shifted, and there will not be the support in the Congress to move forward with that. So what we've been doing in the meantime, and I don't know that this is a particularly well understood program, is that the president has been using the tools of the presidency through regulation to make significant changes, increasing the mileage of automobiles, working to require utility plants to do more to limit their own pollution. We're going to explore everything because the Obama administration continues to believe that this is a serious problem. It's not going away, whether people can believe in it or not, but it's not going away. And we're going to have to deal with it. And the consequences will be more and more pressing on countries like the United States and Australia. So we're going to be consulting and then figuring the way forward.
You've just come from New Zealand, and while you were there, you were asked a question which led you to rule out presidential runs in 2012 or 2016. A lot of your supporters would be disappointed to hear that. Why do you rule it out?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a great honor to have run for the presidency of the United States and to have put those 18 million cracks in the glass ceiling, and now you have a woman prime minister, and we're seeing that around the world. Brazil just elected a woman president. So I am very committed to enhancing the empowerment and the roles of women in politics and every other aspect of society. And I hope to see a woman elected president of our country. It's as those of you who followed, an incredibly intense and contentious political system. But I'm very happy serving as Secretary of State, and there are other things that I want to do in my life in the future. So I think I'll be a strong advocate for whoever throws his or her hat into the ring.
I think we should talk to the audience.
Okay.
All right, let's take our first question from Adrian McMillan.
Do you think politics has moved beyond a contest of ideas to a straight popularity contest?
It's a good question, and it's always been a little bit of both. And sometimes ideas are predominant, and sometimes personalities are. It has to remain in a democracy a combination. Otherwise, I think it's hard for someone with the best ideas who cannot communicate or connect with people to get elected, to implement those ideas. And it's hard if all you have is a great personality and no ideas to govern. So somehow there has to be a meeting of the minds. You know, I believe strongly that we need balance, and balance in mature democracies like ours requires that you have the core of ideas and plans and policies, and that when you compete in the electoral system, you learn, if you don't already know how, better to communicate what you believe, so that people do have something of a roadmap as to what you will do should they vote for you. We have a very famous saying from one of our well-known political leaders in America, former governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, who says that you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. So you get out there and you don't know what you're doing, but you've got a great way to get people to vote for you, and then you wake up the day after and you say, oh my goodness, now what? It's like the dog catching the car. You have to get to work and actually implement a policy. So we need, in today's very media-centric world, people who can do both. I mean, I do somehow worry that, you know, in my own country, could Abraham Lincoln have been elected president in the 21st century? You know, he was awkward and gawky looking. He was so tall. He had, you know, what were called in those days bouts of melancholia, which we might call depression. Could he have withstood not just the 24/7 news coverage, but everybody being their own reporter with a cell phone? You know, I don't know. And what are countries like mine or yours or any other losing out by if we don't take politics seriously enough to get beyond what is the sort of the flash and the celebrity part of it, to really get into understanding who these people are and what they stand for? So I hope it stays a combination, and that we hold our elected officials to a standard where, yes, they have to be able to communicate, but they also have to have a platform.
Our next question is from a political science student, Alex Mashmet. Where are you?
Well, thank you for your time today, Madam Secretary. My question is, do you think the Republican takeover of the House will affect the timeline for the drawdown of troops in Afghanistan next year?
It's really another good question, and it's one that you know, we hope not, because we think we have a good plan going into the NATO ISAF meetings in Lisbon in about 2 weeks' time. We think that striking the right balance, you'll hear me say that word a lot, balance, striking the right balance between moving and expecting the Afghan government to do more for its own defense, but not being hasty in our transition to their lead in security, is what we're attempting. And we think that that's well understood and accepted by the majority of members in Congress, but until the new Congress gets assembled into session early next year, we're not going to know exactly what their points will be in their discussions with us. Just one final thing on that. I'm very grateful for Australia's support to the mission in Afghanistan. You have the largest non-NATO contingent of troops serving, and by everyone's estimation, doing an excellent job under very difficult circumstances. And we are seeing progress. I mean, again, sometimes it gets lost in the headlines of everything that can and does go wrong. But if you talk with the people who are on the ground actually putting together the defense forces, both the Army and the police, looking at the increasing buy-in from local leaders to their own defense, we are making progress. So we hope we can keep a steady course, hold ourselves to our own benchmarks, and make the progress that we need between now and July 2011, when we do begin a transition. And then President Karzai and the Afghan government have said they want to have complete control by 2014. Now, I want to underscore that certainly the United States and NATO will remain in a non-combat supportive role as a partner of the people and government of Afghanistan, which has gone through a traumatic 30 years of invasion and civil war and warlordism and Talibanization and so many of the other challenges they've faced. We don't want to abandon the people of Afghanistan. So we will take this step by step.
We'll take one of our Twitter questions, Madam Secretary. @Seggler, who's 21, asks, what do you see as the biggest international relations challenge my generation will have to overcome?
Oh, my.
An easy one, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Well, there's also a lot of political science students in this crowd who may have a more personal view of this. Let me just mention a couple of intersecting ones and put it into a kind of a framework. I think the biggest challenge that people 21 are going to face is how to ensure that the nations of the world work productively together to meet shared challenges, that the world is coming together, not falling apart, that the forces that are forces of negativity and disintegration are matched and overcome by the forces of integration and positive development. It's especially important when one looks at many of the countries that are under tremendous pressure internally because of extremist activities. How do you evolve democratic forms, give people voices, improve economies, so that the huge percentage of the population that is under 25 in most of the developing world believes they have a chance to have a future of positive and successful development. So this is a large overarching issue, but if one looks around the globe today and you see the conflicts, not just in Afghanistan, but in the neighbor Pakistan, through much of the world going toward North Africa, with Somalia and Yemen being two examples, it's a really hard question, and everyone needs to be thinking about how to work towards some answers. And I'll just end with this. I mean, I'm hopeful that the changes in technology that promote social connectivity will help to hold governments accountable. And it's really someone like the young man's age and some of the students here who are going to determine whether or not that's the case. But we're beginning to see some positive signs of using Twitter and Flickr and YouTube and Facebook and all the other manifestations. In fact, I have a whole unit in the State Department that is devoted to what we call 21st century statecraft or 21st century diplomacy. And we're using outreach, young people to young people, to not only tell you to connect with your friends and talk about, pop culture or make arrangements to meet up, but talk about what's going on in your society. There was a recent example in Syria, which I found especially interesting. Students who were being physically abused by some of their teachers in the state schools began filming that and putting it on YouTube. And all of a sudden, the government could not ignore what had been constant complaints about abusive teachers in the classroom, and those teachers were dismissed. We're working with young people who are creating applications in Africa to help farmers get real-time weather information and prices of their crops so that they can build a better harvest for themselves and their families. I mean, there are many examples like that, and I think that may be one of the biggest changes, if used correctly, where we can open up governments and hold them to account.
We'll go back to our audience. Michelle Yuan, what would you like to ask the Secretary of State?
Thank you. My question is, how do we handle the stress of being the U.S. Secretary of State? Because I cannot even handle the stress from my exams very well.
Well, good luck on your exams. Yeah, actually, I think being Secretary of State is less stressful than taking exams. First of all, I feel energized by what I'm doing on behalf of our country. It's a great honor to come to Australia representing the United States of America, representing President Obama, making the case for closer cooperation, not just between our governments, but between our peoples. And I think like any job in the 21st century, it seems, compared to these jobs in the past, much more stressful because it's a 24/7 job. You know, I read about my predecessors who had a lot more time to think and to consult, and they weren't expected to be available around the clock to answer questions from the press or talk with a world leader across the globe. So you just have to adapt to it. It's part of the environment in which we work, but it is energizing. So I am very grateful that I get to do this job at this point in American history, and I'll be doing it as long as I can to try to make a difference.
One of your biographers has noted that even as an adolescent you were self-confident. Do you ever have self-doubt?
Oh, of course, everyone does. I mean, if you don't, I would worry about you. But just, don't overdo it. I think that maybe because I have now lived a lot longer than most of the people in this auditorium, I look back on my 20s and just so many hard questions. What was I going to do and how was I going to do it? And as a young woman, what were the barriers that I needed to get around, over, or through? And what about relationships? And was I going to get married, not get married? What did that mean? Was I going to keep my name, not keep my name? I mean, I think the 20s are among the most stressful time in anybody's life because you're in formation. You're trying to figure all these things out. And yet I also hope that young people don't, how can I say this? Don't be too hard on themselves. It's so easy to compare yourself now in this totally media-saturated environment with everybody else. Everybody else who's smarter, everybody else who's more attractive, everybody else who does this or that. And get over it. I mean, be the best person you can be, and take stock of who you are, and deal with whatever challenges you have, and try to be as open to new experiences while staying on a course that gives you a level of satisfaction and reward. And the other thing is you will likely live so much longer than most people that preceded you in your families, going back generations, that you'll have chances to make different choices along the way. I have dear friends women who had their first baby at 18 and their first baby at 45. That was impossible, 50 years ago. Women's lives are so much more adaptable and flexible than certainly my mother's was. And for young men, the same thing. So many more choices are available to you. And so I hope that you learn techniques for dealing with the stress, and that it doesn't overwhelm you and kind of tear you down. And instead, you really find a way to be satisfied with who you are and what you're doing.
We'd like you to give us a quick response to a video question next on education. It's from South Australia.
Hi, my name's Penny Marshall from Adelaide, and I'm in training to be a primary school teacher. My question to you is based on your opinion it takes a village to raise a child. How do you think it is possible to achieve community-based education in our increasingly overprotective and cautious society.
Well, Penny, thank you for deciding to be a teacher, number one, particularly a primary school teacher. But that's a really interesting question also because it is the case that we are perhaps limiting our young children's opportunities to explore, make mistakes, learn from them, pick themselves up, dust themselves off, go on. You know, many families in the United States don't want their children walking to school alone, don't want them riding a bike, don't want them out of their sight, don't want them playing outside, want them in organized activities instead of free play, using your imagination. And I think it is hard to deal with what are the legitimate fears and anxieties that are often stoked by the press. You know, one terrible case of a kidnapping when that's 1 out of 30 million, but still it just makes any parent just their heart constrict with fear. You know, we then overreact and we prevent our children from, you know, taking what are the normal risks of growing up. I think about, you know, my own childhood, and I know it was very different the way I was raised, and then obviously because of circumstances, the way my daughter was raised, but even her friends. We have to be careful that we don't too early kind of confine kids into structures that don't give them the chance to explore and find out who they are and what they're good at. So I hope that in the context of community schooling and support for it, that you can find the answer to that as you begin your career as a primary teacher. But it's a good question because it's very different. We are exposing our kids to so many more things than children have ever been exposed to in the past. They are in some way more, quote, worldly wise, but less personally experienced because they don't have to take care of themselves as much as younger generations of kids had to do. So we're kind of conducting an experiment, and I think we have to be very careful that we are not somehow undermining the natural stages of children, you know, developing a sense of confidence and ability to cope that is the basis of being a successful adult.
Let's try to whip through a couple of audience questions. I'd like to call on Azmina Hussain.
As a Australian-born Muslim that wears a headscarf, I'd like to know your opinions on those that claim that the hijab and burqa is un-Australian, and more importantly, your opinion on a woman's right to dress as and how she pleases.
Well, I am aware of the difference between a headscarf and a burqa and a hijab, and I think that there is a difference. I think that a headscarf is a very appropriate manifestation of a woman's choice, so long as it is her choice, which is a premise of my answer. But I think we have to face the reality that in a society where there is a legitimate threat of terrorism, not being able to see one's face, not being able to, you know, have some sense of communication in that way is, for many societies, a challenge. So I understand the dilemma, and I think it is a legitimate dilemma. I know, for example, in Pakistan, you know, many of the men who are conducting suicide bombing missions arrive covered in a burqa. So if you are looking at other countries that are understandably nervous about extremist activity, like France and other European countries, I think it's a close question. I think it's a hard question. If we were, you know, able to, you know, wheel the clock back several decades where we were not facing these security threats from, you know, packages put on airplanes or like what we saw in Mumbai and the rest, I'm not sure people would be so concerned about it. So that's my answer.
Patrick Clark, it's your turn to ask a question.
In your opinion, Madam Secretary, how close are we to achieving true gender equality here in the Western world?
We've made a lot of progress, and we are constantly in societies like Australia's and America's pushing forward. So on balance, again, I think we've made a lot of progress. But if you look at much of the rest of the world, that progress has not moved forward. I was recently in Papua New Guinea and met with a large group of women leaders there. And the violence against women in that society is debilitating. It interferes with girls going to school. It interferes with women being able to be productive members of their families and communities. And it was one of the most important issues that the women raised with me. If you look at many other societies where women are not given the right to go to school, to get health care, to get access to credit, where they are diminished, marginalized, where crimes against them are considered marginal, if at all. We have a lot of work to do. And why do I emphasize that? Because I think that there's very clear evidence, it's irrefutable at this point, from the World Bank and other respected international organizations, that societies that do not expand opportunities for women are societies that are more prone to authoritarianism, more prone to extremism, less likely to develop, more likely to be left out of the 21st century's opportunities. I also think there's a lot of unfinished business about the LGBT community. We believe strongly that there needs to be more attention paid to the persecution and abuse of LGBT people around the world.
Just explain what that means.
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people. That's what we call sort of our shorthand in the United States. And we're very concerned about legislation in some parts of Africa in particular that actually calls for the death penalty for people who are LGBT. A lot of persecution, a lot of terrible abuse. So the human rights agenda is a very active one and needs to remain so, because I do think when any group of people or any individual, as we've seen with the recent Nobel Prize winner in China, are persecuted for either who they are or what they say or what they believe as opposed to what they do, that diminishes freedom far beyond the individual cases. So we're making progress on these human rights agendas, but I think it's everyone's business to not only expect your government to try to put into place a framework for regulatory protections, but to stand up against sexist jokes or homophobia or prejudice against people with headscarves, whatever you see that is really chipping away at someone else's humanity, to say, no, we don't do that. We don't do that in Australia. We don't do that in the United States. So it's not just a government-to-government thing with a law being passed, but it changes the attitudes of how we interact with each other on a daily basis.
We have a video question that relates to some of what you've talked about there, so let's have a look at that. It's from regional Victoria.
My name's Jack Hegarty, I'm 20 years old and I live in the Latrobe Valley of regional Victoria. We know from several surveys that an inequality in marriage legislation often translates to an inequality of self-worth. Madam Secretary, what's your view on same-sex marriage?
Well, I have been a strong supporter of ending discrimination and particularly focusing on hate crimes and workplace bias and the like. And in our country, the issue of same-sex marriage, which is it's a matter left to each state sets the rules, is proceeding on a state-by-state basis. I think that's the best way for it to proceed. I have not supported same-sex marriage. I have supported civil partnerships and contractual relationships. Yet I am supportive of our states taking actions that they believe reflects the evolution of attitudes about this. It is a signature issue, and as the young man just said, for many people it is sort of a symbolic issue that if you don't support that, you don't support equality between people, and particularly for the LGBT community. But I'm very comfortable saying that we, in the Obama administration, fully support every kind of equality, opening up opportunities in the State Department, which is my province of jurisdiction. And we will continue to support states making their own decisions about this. I imagine, given the evolution of this issue, that it will not be a big issue in 20 or 30 years. I think it will have moved on. And if you look at surveys, we want I personally want to see gays serving openly in our military, and young members of the military have no problem with that. People older are still somewhat resistant to it. So I think it's like anything else. It is a new change, a new mindset of what it means to be fully respectful of another person, that you'll see that evolve.
Let me invite Wayne Bergman, the Executive Director of the Kimberley Land Council, to ask his question.
Madam Secretary, given the history of Indigenous people, Native Americans in America, and the Obama's administration's what I call uncompromising commitment to engage with that leadership, can Australia learn from those experiences when engaging with Aboriginal people here?
Well, we have a long history of the mistreatment of our Native American population in the United States. It's a series of sad chapters in our history. We have now what we call sort of sovereign relations. Our Native American tribes, which were given land or are otherwise recognized by the federal government, are in a government-to-government relationship with the United States. And we're really focused on doing everything we can to improve lives in Indian country. There have been some positive changes, giving more authority over the use of that land to tribes, creating opportunities for them to exploit natural resources, to start casinos, which for a number of tribes is a great economic development tool. So we're going to continue to try to develop a more respectful, responsive relationship.
Natalie Hutchins, a Labor candidate running for office, has our next question.
It's an absolute honour to have you here in the room with us today and to be in Melbourne. My question is a little bit of personal advice. My husband is an Australian senator and I've been pre-selected to run in the state election in a few weeks' time, and I was wanting to get a little bit of advice about how to balance a successful political career and a happy marriage.
Well, you're both going to be serving at the same time, is that right, if you're elected? Well, that's going to be interesting at home. I think, look, every person's different, every marriage is different, every political career is different, but, trying to work out routines so that you can actually see one another, despite your busy political careers, is important. And maybe having some ground rules going into it as to what you will and won't discuss, because it is challenging, especially if you, by any chance, have slightly differing points of view. So it would be my hope that you could have a very straightforward conversation about how you're going to manage this and how you're going to organize your time in order to keep, the private marriage part of your life going while you're both out there doing all the politics, because it can be all-consuming. You can, in political life, it can be just, you never will answer enough questions, see enough constituents, do what you have to do if you don't draw some lines and some boundaries as to where your political day stops and the rest of your life starts.
Speaking of life around politics, we have a Facebook question from YiaYia Zoe. What do you and President Obama talk about outside of the political spectrum, and how do you unwind?
Well, President Obama and I talk about raising children in the White House, since he has 2 daughters, and we had our daughter from the age of about 12 and a half until 20, with her father being president. So we talk a lot about that, and he's a very active parent, as is Mrs. Obama.
And what's your advice to him on that?
Well, early on, before they took office, I spoke with both the president and Mrs. Obama. They talked to me about the school that Chelsea went to when she was in Washington, and they ended up with both of their girls going to that school, in part because it's a very supportive environment, but one where the girls get treated like everybody else. It's not some big deal where they're kind of on a pedestal, which is deadly for young girls and boys who are trying to find their own way. We talked about what it's like, living in the White House, where you have 138 rooms and hundreds of people who are doing everything, how you maintain some semblance of a normal life with your children, doing chores and being expected to do their homework and all the other things that you would do if you were not living in the White House. And it's been a great, great job. Being fully involved parents, going to soccer games and basketball games and parent-teacher conferences, and drawing the line so that their children are not exploited for the press or for politics. But giving them the chance to enjoy the experience, so that, when we have a state visit, for example, when Prime Minister Singh from India was there, we have a small gathering on the 2nd floor of the White House before you go down to the state floor for all of the official evening. And the girls came in to, meet Prime Minister Singh and his wife and his daughters who were there. So we talk a lot about how you, again, keep that balance. It's a wonderful experience. You get to go places, meet people, see things that are truly unique.
And what about you unwinding the second?
Oh, for me, I get away from it as far as I possibly can.
But you don't have any anonymity. How does that? If you had an hour of anonymity, what would you want to do?
Well, I do. I don't tell anybody, but. I work in Washington, but Bill and I live in New York, and our daughter and her husband live in New York. So whenever I can, I go home to New York. We have our house out about 50 minutes from New York City. We go out to dinner, we go for long walks, we take our dogs into, the nature areas around our home, we go to movies. We just do normal, everyday things to unwind and just to catch your breath. And when I travel, it's hard. But if I have a minute, I'll go for a walk. I went for a long walk along the waterfront in Wellington when we got in to New Zealand, and went for a walk in the rain in Christchurch. And I hope to be able to go for a walk if our schedule gets a little more forgiving sometime in the next 2 days here. But it's just, it's just to try to literally let your breath out, to take some time to not think about all of the problems, and especially out in nature, just being outside and feeling like you're part of something much, much bigger than, the to and fro of politics and international diplomacy.
I'm sure everyone would love to keep going, but you have many other engagements that you have to get onto, so we'll have to wind it up here. I know our audience here and at home very much appreciates your time and engagement. So thank you for your company, Madam Secretary, and thank you to all of you who've taken part too.
Thank you all.